Hi, everyone. I am back again with somebody different this time. I wanted to have a conversation with my dear friend, Shelley Thomas, who is a recently retired professor of French from Middle Tennessee State University. And Shelley has used a very unique and highly intuitive approach to teaching languages, not just French, but other languages as well. And I thought it was so fascinating every time I hear her talk about it. And I thought other people might find it interesting too. So here we are. This is Dr. Shelley Thomas. And if you just want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do, that'd be great.
Sure, yeah. So thanks, Tiff. I got my degree in French. I went to France and I was a nanny. And I came back and I got my PhD and found it very difficult to teach. I was, of course, all PhDs and most of us trained to teach a language, have it in literature. And, we're striving to teach that, get up there and teach that literature course and get through the language courses. It's such a painful thing to, and I experienced it myself, to go from learning a language, grammar, all that kind of stuff, and then you hit a literature course, you really can't speak or understand, or you can't be as fluent as they expect you to be. And I remember, you remember Ahmed,
Yes.
our friend, he said, man, I know it's the same thing worldwide, but he was talking about how they were trying to get him to learn through Shakespeare, for heaven's sakes. Can you imagine
what
painful that must be? Yeah, I mean, they would use Shakespeare as a text. It's so, it's just like the emperor's wearing no clothes. That's exactly what it's like. Everybody's pretending that these things work, but it would be laughable if it weren't so painful and tragic. And you'll see worldwide people just say, oh, I'm not cut out to learn languages. And
right.
So that's so sad when it's such a natural thing and we could be learning 10 or 15.
Well, what comes to mind immediately for me is, of course, what you're going to be touching on, which is, my experience with learning language in high school was pretty miserable. And I took Spanish in high school. And the reason I chose Spanish is because when I was little, my mom and I moved to Mexico for a while. So right about 3.5 years old, when I'm picking up accents and learning languages, I picked up Spanish very relatively fluently for my age. And when I came back home to the United States in high school, I was like, I'm going to take Spanish because that'll be an easy A. It'll all come back to me. It did not come back to me, which you might find interesting. I felt like I was starting all over. I was. Yeah, no one engaged with me in Spanish, and other than when I was little. And so when I took Spanish in high school, took Spanish 1 and 2 because it was required, something was, and I basically remembered the things that you learn on Sesame Street. That's it.
Why? You know why? Because TPR, total physical response, and TPRS. The story.
Yeah, definitely want you to talk about that too when we get to it. Yeah.
So it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
This may seem like a really stupid analogy, but when I learned these methods, and I was just like, oh, this is the answer. What are we thinking? It's like, can you imagine trying to teach children to eat through their nose? I mean, right. If they go like that, it will get down in their throat and go in their stomach. It's painful. It's stupid. Somebody watching that would say, what do you think your mouth is for? That's how stupid it is that we're teaching languages the way we are. It's unsuccessful and painful and stupid.
Right.
So, yeah.
Nobody retains it. Like even if what I learned in high school, I didn't retain anything. I can still tell you what I learned on Sesame Street though.
Yeah. And you know why? Because you engaged with it. So what happened was I went through the painful process of pretending like this stuff worked for several years. And then I went to a conference, and of course, you knew Blaine, didn't you? Or did you watch videos of it? I saw somebody at a conference who was demonstrating these methods, and I thought, oh my God, this is it. So I took a sabbatical, I learned the methods, and just kept training myself and training myself. And I said to myself, I need to create a graduate course and teach other teachers how to do this like right away. So that's what I did. So at MTSU, I created this graduate course. I also started using my son's grammar school for a training program. So we went on TV when he was in like third grade or something. His teacher let me use the whole class, and they came into the MTSU studio, and that's how I started with his third or fourth grade class. Yeah.
I didn't realize that. That's really neat.
So I was like learning how to use it like with all age humans. Like I went to his school, he was at Reeves Rogers, and I talked to the principal and I said, can I just go ahead and come here every week and teach every grade level and see how it works with different human beings? Because what I was doing, I was taking what I was learning and kind of configuring a new thing so that I could use it with all levels of humans and in the college classroom. And I don't know if you knew this, that I taught at the Senior Citizen Center here in Murfreesboro.
Oh, do you still? I had no idea we were doing that.
Years.
Wow.
You know when 9/11 happened? I had just walked through the doors of St. Clair, and I saw the elderly people were watching TV. I saw the second tower get hit. And we had no idea what was going on. But that's how long ago, I mean, I think I did this.
That was 01.
Yeah, I found out about this 25 years ago.
Wow.
So anyway, I taught different age humans, and I saw how, they learned in different ways. I had to make changes for different, ages.
Mm-hmm.
And let me add this, because this is a recent thing, the past 5 years, to show you how brain compatible it is. We knew that it worked with dyslexic people because when I created the 5-day language institute and people were coming from the community for the summer, people with dyslexia were coming because they couldn't learn it at their regular public schools, and they were succeeding. Yeah.
Wow.
So you know the Department of Special Needs, or the Department of, so anyway, they had a special needs program for kids in high school who had special needs, all the way from being in a wheelchair and not being verbal to slightly autistic. Okay. They wanted to create a college experience for them because they probably wouldn't be able to go, but they wanted to create a college experience in the summer where they could visit different types of classes that were kind of tailor-made for them in all different disciplines. So they contacted me because they knew about my language institute, and they said, hey, do you want to have a room full of, special needs kids? And I said, yeah, bring them on. I taught them the exact, you know how it starts out. Stand up, sit down, touch your head, touch your nose. Dude, they were getting it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was beautiful.
That's so sweet.
My little brother is completely dyslexic, and that's one of the reasons he didn't graduate from college. Now he's making more money than I am, doing computers, because dyslexic people are, of course, they have a superior part of their brain is being developed that goes beyond a lot of stuff we can do. So anyway, it makes me feel really good. Yeah,
it's like a different kind of order in their mind. Yeah, and not just them, like anybody that we classify as disordered, kind of. It's just a different kind of order. But yeah, I love that. Do you still market to, do you still have students coming in to learn who are dyslexic?
Well, since COVID, we had to pull back and we just do telecourses. The only live telecourse we're doing is with American Sign Language. The other teachers so we have 10 different languages that we've developed over the past 20 years. Now those teachers are in China, Syria, they're in the different parts of Japan, they're doing full-time work. So we have 5 of the languages recorded, or 4. So I don't know who's taking the classes now.
Gotcha. Well, can you go ahead and explain this method that you're using? Is it TPRS? I can't remember what everything stands for.
Yeah,
So
that's okay.
be as explicit as you can.
Sure, sure. So it's very simple. TPR, total physical response, is when you take parts of the language that need no translation. For example, if I say to you, okay, class, I'm going to demonstrate what I want you to do, and I'm going to say it in the target language. So when I say touche la tête, what will you do? You'll touch your head, and you'll understand that I'm saying touch the head, touche la tête. I won't do anything that you don't understand. Everything that I do, I'm going to demonstrate and I'm going to say. So this is how we start off. And this is actually what happened to us in our first language. And the gentleman who I will say, instead of invent, discovered this. He discovered it because he had a Japanese GTA, graduate teaching assistant, and he had this idea, I think it's just how parents teach their children. So he had the Japanese graduate student give him commands in Japanese, like, touch your head, stand up, sit down, and there begin to be success and retention. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the cool thing is, you would think that you could only do this if you're young. But what we've learned is adults have definite advantages over us when we were babies. Now, when we were babies, our parents had to talk to us for about 2 years like this, or maybe 1 to 2 years before utterances started coming out. So that 2-year period is called the silent period. And babies are taking in the rhythm, the syntax, the pronunciation. They're taking these things in, and they're taking it in because their brain was made to be a pattern seeker and a problem solver. So the baby doesn't need to know where to put a verb, or what is a verb, or what is a subject. The baby knows from the repetition of the patterns and the acting out and the touching and the seeing exactly what to do. So eventually, the brain starts putting all these things in the right place. And between age 1 and 2, language production starts. So the cool thing with adults is, and you've been through this, in my classes, I will start with TPR, total physical response. I'm saying, everybody's doing, and I'm asking them to just not say anything, to just listen, so we can imitate that 2-year silent period. Why? Because you only have so many attention units. For example, it takes fewer attention units to hear something than to speak something. If you're trying to speak, you can feel, if you've ever taken a foreign language, how painful it is.
Yeah.
So we want to just focus on the fewest attention units possible. So within, and someday if you wanted to do it, we could, within an hour, I can start having simple language production. The students can understand and answer yes, no questions, either or, black and white, that type of thing. Now,
within an hour.
Why does it take an adult 1 hour and it takes a baby human 2 years? Because an adult has a fully formed body and it has a fully formed language in its head. So every time something new comes to the brain, it runs back and tries to put it with something it already knows. Very smart. And when somebody hears hôpital, that sounds a lot like hospital. And it runs back and attaches it to hospital, so that when Westerners learn Western languages, they learn it much more quickly than non-Western languages because they don't have anything to attach it to. So we take total advantage of that in the classrooms. So that's the first stage. And we do about.
Well, can we pause right here for a second? Because what immediately comes to mind is when you say, Western languages versus non-Western languages. When you say Western languages, are you primarily referring to Latin-based languages?
Romantic, yeah.
Yeah.
Romance
Okay.
language.
Yeah, and it is interesting to listen, or I do better in reading. If I have to read something in a foreign language, especially if it's a Latin-based, I can find patterns that are recognizable from what I know. But when it comes to a non-romance language, I feel like a deer in headlights. Like everything just sort of shuts down, and I'm just filled with confusion. So this is an interesting reason why.
Perfect that you said that. Your affective filter came up. Why? Because it wasn't comprehensible to you. So this is what we train teachers to try to understand, because teachers have been taught to constantly raise the bar. Just immerse these kids in the foreign language and they're going to learn it. Just go to the country and you're going to learn it. False. Your brain is going to come up with the affective filter and shut out things if it feels uncomfortable. And we know from brain research that, cortisol, the chemical of concern, just regular research that has nothing to do with foreign languages, but that's out there. When a human enters a classroom and his cortisol level is, let's say, 20, if he doesn't know anybody in the classroom, it shoots up to 60 or 80 immediately. Wow. Because there's no connection, and thus the need for icebreakers. Mm-hmm. So when you bring the cortisol level down, of course, there's an opening for new information to come in, but the comfort level needs to be established first. And, that aside, if you walk into a classroom or if you go into a country and everybody's speaking a foreign language, it's an illusion to think immersion is going to do the trick for you. Or what basically happens, if you can imagine a kid in a pool, when a kid enters the pool and he can't understand anything, it's like dunking his head underwater. So it's not immersion, it's submersion. They can't breathe. Mm-hmm. And you as a language learner can't breathe or can't understand. So that's why it's best to start with TPR.
So I have a question. This may seem obscure, but I would assume that there is something related to not just using body, you're not just touching the head and raising your arm.
I can say touch the chair.
Yeah. So I just wonder how much of a role humor and laughter and enjoyment plays in the process of learning. And let me put it in a totally different context. In the Lakota tribe tradition, according to Black Elk, from the book Black Elk Speaks, they have a group of individuals they call them Heyoka, and I may be mispronouncing that, but it's Heyoka, Heyoka. The Heyoka are specifically like, the way he describes them, I kind of imagine them as almost jesters, just sort of running, and clowns just running around and acting silly. And they have the Heyoka come out and do their performances before a ceremony begins, especially when they have to have, when the people are distressed or saddened, having the Heyoka come out and be silly and get the people feeling silly. They use those intentionally so that it changes them somehow so that they can take in the power that's coming from the ceremony. Again, I know that's obscure, but what I'm looking at here is the connection between the lightheartedness and the joyfulness and the physical engagement of it, even in terms of how we accept anything especially something that we have to learn or take in for ourselves.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Good point, because that's part of the teacher training program. And you know from being in a class that the absurd is used frequently. Do you remember? So
Absolutely.
instead of saying, touch the cell phone, we might say eat the cell phone. Or
Yeah.
the cell phone under your arm, or laugh with the cell phone. So the number one rule is it must be comprehensible. Okay. Do you get that from my
Yes.
PPR? It must be comprehensible. So what does it mean to the brain? What is brain compatible, comprehensible? Well, it has to have context, humor, physical action, color, everything that you that intuitively know that makes something brain compatible and enjoyable. So humor is definitely one of those things. And you'll notice if you've taken, I think you only took Chinese, and Helen was kind of beginner, but
yeah, I took Chinese one. Yeah.
So you know that the teacher is the first person to do wacky things. We'll dance and we'll, dance like John Travolta. And when the students see us being wacky, they feel at ease being wacky. And, we use Captain Underpants. We don't just say in French, comment est-ce que tu t'appelles? We use Captain Underpants names. Instead of saying, oh, my name is Shelley, je m'appelle Shelley, I would say, je m'appelle Krusty Waffle Tushy. So, do you remember that? I don't know.
Not Krusty Waffle Tushy, but I do remember the underpants guy.
Okay, yeah. So we make every activity in class funny, absurd, the brain loves the unexpected.
Yes.
So that kind of a thing. Yeah, definitely.
So can you talk a bit about the intuitive nature of what you're doing?
Yeah. I'll talk about, well, do you want me to share my screen?
I do, but before we do this, there's something else I want to ask about, and then let's come back to that if you don't mind. I hadn't considered this before when you and I have discussed this method. And even in learning it, I hadn't thought about it until now. But are you familiar with the method of classical education, of how the breakdown, it's sort of broken down, and they call it the trivium, where you've got the first 4 years, basically when from about 5, 6, 7, 8 is referred to as the grammar stage. And they're just like learning all the basics of stuff. And then in the middle, you have the, I can't remember the name of the phase, but this is the Y phase. So this is, so they what, kindergarten, first, second, third. So maybe, yeah, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, or 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grades. It's the same things that you learned before. And if they're doing this, the classical education model was built according to the way a child's mind develops over time. So the 4th and 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade levels are basically the same things that they learned before, but now they get filled in with all of the why. And then the last stage is the rhetoric stage. So now they've learned the basics, now they know why, and now 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, they're going in and they learn the same things all over again, but now it's about defending it or explaining it, sort of like apologetics in a way, but just really deeply knowing it. So it's built over time, and it is structured.
Traditional old-fashioned way of learning? Is it something new?
It's classical education. No, it's different. It is nothing to do with the way public schools in America educate children of any age. This is often happens in private schools. I actually taught my kids for a few years using a classical method. But it's very intentional in that it capitalizes, for lack of a better word, on where the child's brain is in development at that stage. And it works with it and fosters what it's doing. So I'm listening to you talking about, the 2 year silence when children are little, what, age 1 to 3 or whatever. And I'm just sort of weighing it against the few later stages of brain development up into, the end of high school or so. Yeah, is that nonsensical? I don't even know.
Well, what I can do is compare. Yeah, I haven't. I'll compare teaching 2 ways. The old-fashioned way, where you come in and teach them grammar, right about college, or high school. And then they're expected to, I don't know if this is synonymous with what you're saying, they're expected to use the language in real literature. Well,
in high school or in lower grades?
Either one. No.
Okay.
What I'm going for is, no matter how old a kid is, I'll just focus on language. No matter how old a human is, you have to have physical experience. And as we said, it has to be comprehensible, funny, fun, blah, blah, blah. And then what about abstract language? Then look at what we did naturally throughout history. Stories, Mahabharata, thousands of years ago, the Bhagavad Gita. There's stories about human interaction. And that's what we do in the class, and we act out the stories. So concrete experience, then emotional experience. Remember how we go, yay, oh no. We get your emotions involved. I can tell you in Arabic, Mumtaz, I remember what you have to say for good things and for bad things, because we have to connect it with our emotions, because the emotional memory pathway is one of the most fixed ones. Physical is most fixed, physical and emotional. And then if you want me to talk about that, I will, but I would say we're going according to the memory pathways in which are most fixed and last the longest, and which don't. And what I see in traditional education is we're going to the least fixed memory pathways. And that is the least fixed memory pathway. You'll know these intuitively, if you want me to go through this with you intuitively.
Yeah.
And not to tell you. Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Then I'll just say, imagine a list of things to memorize, and touching a hot stove. Okay. Now, the first time you touch a hot stove, and then it's in your memory, okay? It's in your body. And the first time you memorize something, and let's say you just do it once, or you just see this list of things to memorize once, okay? Which memory pathway is more effective? Your physical, are you going to remember not to touch that stove, or what 20 words are on that list?
Definitely the physical. And
Okay.
that physical also has an emotional component to it too, which makes it even more intense. Yeah.
So that's called a conditioned response. The conditioned response memory pathway is more fixed. And in total physical response, that's what we're going for. We're going for the most fixed memory pathway. We are not going for what this is called is semantic memory pathway. Okay, let me give you 2 other examples. Let's say, out of 365 days, there's one day that you have a birthday. Are you more likely to remember all those 365 days or that birthday?
Definitely the birthday, because it's singular.
Good. That's called episodic memory. Now let's compare that with learning how to do a procedure like play the piano or ride the bike. Now, let's say, you know, however old you are, out of all your birthdays, which is stronger? Remembering all those birthdays or remembering how to ride a bike?
Oh, riding a bike.
Duh, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, see how intuitive this is? So riding a bike is called procedural memory pathway. Remembering your birthday, episodic. So you, on your own, you naturally know which is more important, which is more fixed, which you would choose to use in a classroom. And fortunately, one day I figured out that an acronym to remember these in order. Okay. So we said conditioned responses is most fixed. Then we said
Episodic or procedural?
Yeah. Well, conditioned response also includes emotional. Remember we said that?
Yes.
So I'm going to say CRE, conditioned response plus emotional.
Okay.
Then we said procedural for riding the bike. Then we said episodic for the birthday. And last was semantic. Do you know what that spells in French?
I wasn't paying attention to the first letter, so no.
Conditioned response, CR,
Oh, yeah.
emotional, procedural, episodic, semantic.
Crespi? I don't know what you're spelling. Oh, crepe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The version. So this is how I help my teachers remember the chronology. And what we're going for is the most experiential. And see, semantic, it doesn't mean semantic doesn't have a place. It doesn't mean that reading and writing and studying literature and talking about philosophical ideas doesn't have a place. It's just, it doesn't come before, you know, conditioned response, episodic, procedural. So that's what we try to fill the classroom with, those specific activities in a way that all the students understand what's happening. And it's actually easier and quicker to learn in a brain compatible classroom than it is if you're thrown in the country. If you're thrown in the country, you have a period of time where you don't understand anything and you're like this. That's time wasted, for heaven's sakes. So if you start in a brain compatible classroom, you can build up a very firm foundation. If you're getting the right impression of scaffolding, by the time you get to the foreign country, you're like not at all scared. In our classrooms, we definitely speak and listen to native speakers. And that's what's most frightening to people that go abroad. So what we do in the classroom is kind of like what a mother bear does with her cubs. She provides a place where the cubs can play fight.
Yeah.
It's a safe environment. They can bite each other and hit each other. There's no tigers around that can eat them. They're just in a safe environment. So that's what we do in the brain compatible classroom. We give the kids a lot of input. When they try to produce output, they're experimenting with the language just like we did as children. There are no negative repercussions. There's laughter and you know the games we played.
Yes.
Everything is made a joke of.
Yeah. Well, it makes a big difference. And I must confess, like wow. Charlie and I both took the Mandarin 1 and 2 from you through Helen. And that was right after it was almost right after we got back from our honeymoon. So 7 years ago, this summer is when I took those classes with you. And I still have the booklet that goes with it. I don't remember the specifics, but it was done in such a way that I could open up that booklet and be like, oh yeah, I do remember this. Of course, there is one thing that I do remember consistently, and that's Thai Bangla, which is Thai Bangla.
Well, imagine this.
Wait, what does that mean? I don't know what it means.
Yay!
Okay.
the other thing is rats, So in each language, we taught those two emotional reactions. What you're addressing is retention. So it's not only rapid acquisition without fear and anxiety. The example I'll give is, Brian, who taught the Spanish course. When I first trained Brian, the people at the social services for children watched what I was doing on the TV, and they came to me and said, could we hire you to teach? Because my French classes were on TV at night. I didn't even know it. Could we hire you to teach Spanish to the social workers that deal with children's services? And I said, sure. How many people do you have? And they said 4,000. So
oh my.
This was back in, I don't know, 2000 something, 4 or 5, I can't remember. So what we did was, I said, I just trained somebody. You want Spanish? Okay, just trained somebody. You need to create a position for him so that he can be a traveling teacher. They wanted him to go all over the state of Tennessee. So we drove up to Nashville, and the person who creates these positions created it like on the spot. And for 2 years, Brian went around the state of Tennessee teaching these 5-day classes. And let me tell you, we have all the feedback, because I was his official supervisor. And these people are saying, this is the most effective workshop they've ever forced us to go to. And when is the next one?
Wow.
So they took a 5-day, they took them off work for 5 days, and they were just in the classroom. I think it was for 5 hours a day. So they got 25 hours. And after that, at the end of 5 days, and you did Chinese, but the other Western languages, after 5 days and only 3 hours a day, were able to start reading a little simplified novel. But I mean, after 3 times 5, 15 hours, I mean, even less than 15 hours, because that's what we did the last day. That's pretty phenomenal. So what happened was, these people that took Spanish, of course, they had no time for homework. Nobody does. They got to the point where they could read that little novel, but they couldn't take the second part until the following year. Brian said, they have not forgotten a thing.
Wow, that's perfect. That's amazing. Yeah.
So they did part 2. Yeah.
That is just wildly, vastly different from even my own high school experience, not to mention my Latin experience in college, where that they can remember that a year later. I couldn't remember from one, 5 minutes to the next.
It's a no-brainer. Your body was used.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
I mean, your body and humor and context, and acting something out right when it's happening, not thinking in abstract terms. So we do the TPR, then we do the TPRS. We take all this concrete vocabulary, and I'll put it into words you'll understand. Okay, for 3 days, we do about 50 words a day. So by day 3, you've got about 150 workable vocabulary words. We put them into stories and act them out. And then people start retelling these stories,
Yeah.
And then they start reading the novel. So that is how we scaffold. And I mean, we scaffold in math with, addition and subtraction and multiplication and calculus. Why don't we scaffold in foreign languages and everything else? It's so all, if you want me to show this little.
I do, but before you do that, I just wanted to, this may seem out in left field also, but most of my thoughts are out in left field, so but you know that.
Exactly what's happening here.
You keep using scaffolding, and I think you might find this interesting. I don't know if you know this or not, but I discovered last year that I have a condition, whatever, called aphantasia, which means I am mentally blind. I don't have mental imagery.
Oh.
Yeah, I didn't know that was a problem, that was a thing. I didn't know that when everyone else closes their eyes, they see all kinds of stuff, and I see black. Sometimes I see extremely faint light. I will periodically see a lot of tunnels, but everything that I do see is so ridiculously vague. It takes a lot of staring into nothing to try and figure out what an image is. I know that makes zero sense, but I had something very interesting happen last year as I was thinking about the impact that aphantasia has had on me, and I started exploring just different ways that it has affected me, and I didn't even realize it. Which I'll save that for another video. But I had this really fascinating sort of image manifest in my mind, if you will, for lack of a better word. I saw, Raleigh Butler.
Yeah.
She'd asked me about this. She said, "How do you remember things?" And I was like, "I have no idea now that you mention it." And this is so bizarre. I saw, as I was pondering these things, I saw this sort of image flash into my mind. It was like my memory is, and everything that I know is in here and beyond, but it's like it's built. I saw scaffolding, like it was a structured thing and links here and there, but it was that was the word that I used when I was trying to explain to my husband, like, oh my God, I actually just saw the way that my brain retains certain information and how it builds on it without having imagery. And it was
Wow.
a freaking scaffolding. And it was so fascinating.
That's awesome. Wow.
Yeah, it was, that's the only way I know how to explain it. But that's what it was. So that's how I remember.
It's like your brain goes into a library and gets what you need.
That's exactly right. I don't want to talk about that. I'll say that for another video. But yes, that's what's happening. And there's not imagery with it. It's just all the thoughts. And it's like, I actually had a similar experience sort of at the same time, where I was going through some weird psycho-spiritual stuff. And it was like I had my thoughts, everything that I knew was all out here. And I know that this goes with this and that goes with that. And these things are completely unrelated, but I see this connection here. And you mentioned patterns, that our minds are sort of woven in a fashion.
Is a pattern seeker.
Yes, that's exactly right. And it's like it developed its own scaffolding in order to retain and find all this information without having imagery.
Well, Tiffany, don't you imagine that's how autistic people operate too? The world is being filtered through this really unusual patterning system that only their brains have. Yeah.
Yes.
Isn't that neat?
That's interesting. Although it has, yes, that's fascinating. I was gonna. I actually wondered if
our desire to
what?
survive. I mean, your desire to survive is making you do that.
That's exactly right. Because I've always thought, as I age, if I have to lose a sense, it's probably not a big deal, because then, like if I go blind, for example, then all my other senses will be amplified and I'll be a superhero. Right. And so when I started pondering what the implications of not having mental imagery and like exploring it, wait, what did I start out saying?
Were you going to be afraid if you couldn't image, if you didn't have any sight?
No, it was just that I did discover that all of my senses actually did overcompensate for this lack of imagery.
Yeah.
To the point where that's what amplified all of my senses and made me a highly sensitive person in terms of my actual sensorial experience.
Well, remember when I used to try to get you to go walking with me barefooted and you couldn't because it hurt your feet so much?
It
So
was
you were
so overly stimulating.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everything was overly stimulating. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Anyway, so that's just a side note, but I just, the fact that you used the word scaffolding twice was like, well, I had this thing where I actually saw it, what it looks like somehow. And I thought that was fascinating. So, so yeah, but by all means, go back to your intuitive slide.
Okay, let's see. You need to share with me.
No, you share.
Well, you have to enable me. So on your, there's something that you're the
Got it. Got it. Okay. Did that give you the ability?
Let me see.
It says multiple participants can share simultaneously.
Perfect. Okay.
And while you're doing this, I will just let people know, I'll put a link to the CALA Institute, which is Center for Accelerated Language Acquisition. I'll put a link to that with the video so that everybody can find it if they want.
Sure, thanks. So let's see. There's the memory pathways. Conditioned response, emotional, procedural.
Oh, okay. Is this a random image or are those connected to specific parts of the brain through those colors?
No, that's a random image.
Okay.
And yeah, don't presuppose that. So we talked about comprehensible input. Why is it so important? And here's the answer. And you have it right there. How do you feel when you enter a room and you don't recognize people, places, or the language? Just tell me how you feel. Pretend like you're one of my teachers and I'm training you. Just answer.
Lost, confused. Okay. Yeah.
So as far as primitive feelings, you might feel fight or flight, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Your affective filter has come up. Okay. Now, most people have an incorrect idea of learning and what happens in the classroom or what should happen with language learning. So I try to teach them the difference between learning and acquisition, and I give them this option. So I say, do you love coffee? So just go through it with me, Tiffany. Do you love coffee?
I do. Okay.
Did you acquire a taste for coffee by studying its attributes?
I did not.
Did you learn it by tasting it?
I did.
Okay, so that's the difference between learning and acquisition. You can do the same thing with riding a bike. Did you learn to ride a bike by opening up a book and learning the parts of the bike? Or did you learn it by putting your butt on the seat and finding
my butt? I learned through my butt.
So you see, we need to be doing that with languages.
Yeah.
So what kind of comprehensible input produces acquisition? You know the answer from your natural experience. So your natural experience as a parent was you did what with food?
Put it as a parent or did you say as a parent?
As a parent.
Oh, like in administering it.
Did you talk about cookies or actually give one to your kid?
You give it to them.
Yeah, and did you say anything? Did you say this sentence? Would you like to have a chocolate chip cookie, sweetheart? What did you say?
I may have just handed it to them if I said anything, or do you want one? I don't know. Yeah,
what is that? What is that you're giving them?
The cookie.
Did you say cookie? Yeah.
Yeah. So probably, yeah, I would say cookie. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Probably started off with TPR, the concrete object that needs no translation. Okay. So yeah. You handed them cookie. You said cookie. Okay. Now, how did our parents naturally create comprehensible input? Did you just put the cookie there or allow them to taste it?
Yeah, they have to taste it. That's cruel.
right? Okay, a no-brainer. But this is teaching you that you are naturally a good teacher. Okay, so how did we naturally create comprehensible input? We said cookie, and when the kid, after hearing this and seeing it and tasting it, if he wanted one, the first thing that he said was what?
Cookie.
Yeah. Did he say, I would like 3, So he said,
No.
and then the next thing he said probably was want cookie. He added really an abstract word that had no other introduction other than mommy saying, want cookie?
Right.
So they figured out what cookie was, and they figured out that want was something good, that something that should go with cookie. You can't explain want to a child.
Right.
And then they started saying me want cookie. They just naturally knew where to put the subject, the verb, and the object. And you didn't come in and say, no, me is an object pronoun, not a subject pronoun. And you don't put me before the verb, you put me at the end. Do you see how stupid that is?
Absolutely.
Yeah, for us to do that in the class is ridiculous. So
Yeah.
this is another thing I teach the teachers is until kids get to high school, don't even mention grammar. Have language learning and acquisition be all about the experience. Don't even talk about grammar. It's
Right.
like talking about sex to a sick. And I say this to my students in class. If you start talking about sex with a 5-year-old, they'll be like, what? It's going over their head and they don't care about it.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing that happens in a class. Okay.
Yeah.
So then eventually there's self-correction going on. They eventually correct. And this is what happens when we learn those little stories. Do you remember when we learned a story? Initially, we were saying the story wrong. Jackie Chan wants a hamburger, so he goes to McDonald's. We would say stuff like, Jackie Chan, hamburger, go. We kept messing it up. But what happens in a class, just like what happens with a family, somebody is a better speaker than you, and they're going to retell the story correctly. And that's why we got in circles and retold the story over and over again. And the teacher didn't go around correcting you.
Right.
You heard the story correctly so many times that eventually when you said, oh, me want cookie. Oh, I want cookie. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's self-correction going on in the class. And you know what? I teach my kids that this is a big family. And if our little brothers and sisters make mistakes, do we laugh at them or make them feel bad? No, we congratulate them, high five when they get it right. When they self-correct, we practice celebration. And I teach them that, when you practice celebration, what chemical is being released inside you? Well, it's probably dopamine. You're getting a high. You just got something right. So I teach them that they can control the release of certain chemicals in their body while we're in class in a way that will make them addicted to class. Just like you were talking about making it fun and happy and funny.
Yeah.
They want to come back to class. And when at the end of the semester, they're like, oh crap, man, it feels like we're through with summer camp. I don't want to.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then we get more, not only correction, but detailed. I want to. Because why? There's self-interest there. When they see, oh, that's just one cookie. One of the first words that Rishi learned, my son, was he kept saying this word and we couldn't figure out what he was saying. He was saying, another one. He was saying another one.
Yeah.
We're like, what does that mean? And then we realized he said, another one. Okay, so do you see how natural it is what we're doing?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I think. And this is guided to let you know that it was developed by a linguist who is well known. Crash.
Oh, okay. Yeah, crashing. Okay. Okay.
So I'll stop here.
Okay. Thank you for that. It's funny you mentioned about Rishi's funny language words when he was trying to say another one, because I was going to bring up this about my niece. My brother's little girl, it was almost immediately, like she was within just the first few months, she was clearly mimicking people's faces and expressions.
Yeah.
And she was learning. It was clear she was learning what to do. And as soon as she could vocalize, um, she was, I've always thought that she was incomprehensible for the longest time. My son was incomprehensible as well. But the fascinating thing about my niece is she would, when she would start, she could really communicate something, she would just come out with this garbled sound, and it would, big old long sentence sounding. And then my brother or sister-in-law would say, what did you say? She would repeat exactly the sounds that she had. So it was like she had her own language. She knew what she was saying from a very early age. And she was also, in addition to mimicking people's facial expressions, she would mimic the sound, the tones. First of all, she was clearly born to perform, but she's 5 now, and she's still, she speaks much more clearly, but it's not as clear. Like it's still not always easy to understand what she's saying, but she knows so distinctly what her words are that even when it was completely nonsensical sounding to everyone else's ears, she would repeat verbatim what she just said, just as nonsensical, but she knew what she was talking about. And I find that fascinating.
Well, here's something that you can add to that. It was the experience in France when I was a nanny. So Noelle, the mom, would take me into the room. Okay, there was 3 little boys. The baby was in the room. He was 1. He couldn't talk yet. So Noelle was teaching me the routine. Okay, Shelley, now we're going to go to the baby's room, and we're going to get him up, and we're going to feed him breakfast. So she walks in and she says, Papa, tu veux manger? So obviously that's some sort of a sound. And what the baby learned first was, okay, Noelle goes away. I start coming in myself. And when he sees me coming in, he says, he repeats.
Yeah.
So she's repeating the song first. And that's, what language is. So that's one thing I learned. We're picking up the song first. And it takes fewer attention units to pick up fewer syllables. When I was in India training teachers to teach us the Indian language with TPR, I foolishly thought, I'll just do the same thing we do in English. Stand, sit. So stand and sit have 1 syllable, right? Well, in Tamil, it's arindaringa, 5 syllables.
Oh.
So we were like, whoa, what was that? We were like, let's use a different word. Can you choose a word that has just 1 syllable? So we had to change the vocabulary that we were teaching, yet it had to be vocabulary that was doable and seeable. Do you see what I mean? So it needs.
Oh, definitely.
We're learning in music, and if we want to make it for babies and beginners, 1 syllable at a time is better, and then you scaffold onto more syllables.
That makes sense.
So it was cool that we learned, I was learning it as I was experiencing it.
Right. I have one more thing that I wanted to ask you about, and then maybe we should probably wrap this up.
Yeah.
Again, this might seem way out in left field, but, and I don't really know what my question is. I just think it's an interesting point of discussion. English and other Latin-based languages, of course, and not just those, but many others, are object-based languages. They are noun-based. Other languages, for example, many indigenous languages, indigenous to the North and South Americas, for example, their languages are often verb-based. And what I mean by that is that in a language like that, for example, their words include a state of being for an object, right? So tree, for example, we just call it a tree. It's an object. It's a thing that's separate from me. But in these other languages that are verb-based, for example, that tree, the name I give tree, is going to be inclusive of, like, it's going to be like tree being. As
Yeah.
when we say, I'm a human being.
Yeah.
So these other languages that are verb-based, they are putting everything else all that in a state of being. And I wanted to talk about how wildly different that is from an object-based language. So English is object-based, it is noun-based, meaning that right out of the gate, when you are learning languages you're learning English as a baby, as a toddler or whatever, immediately, one of the first things that you learn is other, separateness, in that I is a word to indicate I am separate from mother. So that individuation is an essential part of brain development on the one hand. On the other hand, our language immediately others everything, as opposed to a verb-based language, which recognizes that everything is connected, everything is related. So my word, if I am speaking Navajo, for example, which is verb-based, then the word for tree is going to include something that will indicate that that tree is in a state of being as I am in a state of being. And it's a completely different framework at scaffolding than the noun-based languages. So I'm looking at the way that we in Western tongues, for example, we don't just other everything by the way that we're taught. It is literally a part of our language, which is monumental. So everything is immediately separate from me. And that makes it much more difficult to relate to others, other humans, and all other beings, because even within our very own language, we separate everything. So I'm thinking about that as you're talking. It's sort of running in the back of my mind, and I'm curious, as somebody who teaches language, and that I don't know if Mandarin is verb-based. I don't know what languages you have taught there at CALA that might be verb-based. Have you taught languages that are verb-based there?
Okay, listen, this is so great that you brought this up.
Okay.
Guess what I'm taking? Sanskrit.
Is it? Yay, this is exciting.
So it's clear to see that some languages are less aware than other languages, and they're producing less aware human beings.
Right.
So this is one reason it's so beautiful to take as many different languages as you can, and yes, take some sort of a verb-based language. It stretches your, I don't know what to call it, your soul, your mind, your spirit. Yeah, definitely. It's fantastic to be in a language, be in a living language that's recognizing states of being, and that it helps you feel, oh yeah, we're all one.
So that is built into Sanskrit? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Oh, and you know how? Oh, there's a modulation. We're all one. There's a modulation in that language. There's a modulation in that language.
I don't know what you mean. What do you mean by that?
If you are looking at a lake and you go like that in the water, there's a modulate. There's
ripples.
Ripples. Excuse me. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So we're producing different ripples of being, and some languages recognize that, and some languages don't recognize the subtlety of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's awesome that we can partake of another language.
Have you taught verb-based languages?
No, I have taken, all 10 of the languages that are taught because I had to be a guinea pig for them. So
Yeah.
I have felt how different each one of them is. And I've read a lot of Native American books by teachers to know when they explain things, they're having a hard time doing it in the English language. They bring, I don't have the names of the books, but sometime we can. It's not about language, but when he's trying to describe something that he feels or has experienced, and I find this also when I talk to my Tamil friends, or they're trying to explain an experience that doesn't have the English words for it.
Yeah.
Which is, so cool.
Yeah, so other languages like Sanskrit, for example, are going to be far more rich in experience-based talk.
Let me tell you this. So I just learned the other day in my class, he said, he'll take ah, and he'll talk about all the different vowels or consonants that can be with ah that give it a different meaning. And he said, these are only the ones we use. According to the ancient texts, you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
There are many more uses. There are many more meanings, but we are not capable of using them. So they don't exist for us in reality right now. Just like we're born with the capability to learn every single language, but if it's not done, our brain wisely prunes it because it's too much.
Yeah.
So our awareness isn't coming across certain parts of language at this point. Isn't that cool?
Right. It is cool because English, for example, is very technical. Like it's a good language for technical speak, which makes sense because it was born in the West, where we got Western philosophy, which largely shaped, American and European philosophy. I think I actually lost my thought.
Oh, but I get what you're saying.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Anyway, I'm really fascinated by the verb-based languages contrasted to the object-based languages. And also I'm very curious to look at those cultures that utilize the verb-based languages and how different that is in comparison to ours. And so you learn really powerfully when you study language just how much it impacts all of society, all parts of culture, and also our own individual experience. I think that's what I was going for. Is English is really good about. It's really good for the sciences because it's microscopic. It's honing everything down. Everything is categorized. Everything is listed. It's very structured. So it's good for giving structure to scientific language, I think. So it's got its pluses and minuses. Just the worst part to me is that it separates us from everything. And it's that 100% influences my everyday experience, whether it's waking up in the morning, having a conversation with you, engaging as a citizen. It doesn't matter. My language informs every aspect of my being. And so I wish that, I'm not going to get it from English, so I need to just do what you're doing and explore the languages that are verb-based and see how they do. What is their worldview under that language structure, if you will?
And you can give talks on that. Beautiful, beautiful segue into future talks.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you for this. I thought this was wonderful. I absolutely loved it. And I'm so grateful for the time that you shared with me.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
yes,
It's
I'd
fun to talk to
love
you.
to, yeah, I would love to come back and maybe we do an hour that's you just kind of not testing it out on me, but you were demonstrating this is
Oh,
how
sure.
it works.
I'll do a Japanese demo with you. That's
Okay.
The good news is Washington knows about TPR, and I've been to Washington the past 3 years to train Arabic and Chinese teachers when they come in and try to teach English in the schools in America. They want to learn TPR.
Mm,
So I have a little demonstration that I can do with you.
perfect. That'd be awesome. Okay.
Thanks, sweetheart.
Thank you, dear.
Au revoir.
Thank you so very much. Love you. We'll talk soon.
Thank you. Au revoir.
Yes.